you very much. I remember coming here about 12 years ago when the bomber David Copeland had tried to kill many local people with his failed attempt. He went on to claim lives in the gay community in Soho. He previously failed to kill residents in Brixton. So there's nothing unique about any one society or one country in the form that terrorism and intolerance takes. I was proudest, I think, in the 8 years I was mayor by the way Londoners stood together when we saw the horrific bombings on our underground and a bus. There wasn't one single incident that we're aware of when one Londoner turned against another, because we knew the people that had come to kill us had come to divide us. And the reality is, as we've seen coming out of the horrors in Norway, humanity has to stand together against those that preach intolerance. But one thing has worried me, the way in which most of the commentators on the right have tried to write out of this act of horrific barbarity any political significance. Most of the commentators on the right have said, this is a lone madman. This is someone who's insane. A sort of political version of Hannibal Lecter from the Hollywood movies. But that isn't the case at all. There is a sort of spectrum of intolerance in our society. At its most respectable end, you have David Cameron saying multiculturalism has been bad for Britain. And it works its way through increasingly strident attacks until you get someone like Andrew Gilligan, who seems to be obsessed. And beyond that, Melanie Phillips, writing week after week in the Daily Mail, writing a book called Londonistan, saying that Islam poses a threat to our way of life. Well, I feel no more threatened by the Muslims that live in London than my parents did by the Jews that lived in London. And as Londoners came together to stop the fascists marching through what was a predominantly Jewish area 75 years ago, we must come together this September to stop their successors marching through this area to bring fear and terror to the community that now lives here. I really do want to emphasise this point about there's nothing extraordinary about anti-Breivik. Killing people isn't difficult. It's happened through every society. People do it in wars. On this continent, barely 20 years ago, in the former Yugoslavia, ordinary people went next door to their neighbour's home and butchered their neighbours. Because one political leader, Milosevic, had worked on the assumption he could secure power by dividing the majority Serb community against the minority of Croats and of Bosnians. Ordinary men and women, not people caught up in political groups or paramilitary groups, went next door and murdered their neighbours, as they did at virtually the same time in Rwanda. It is all too easy for any politician or commentator to divide us. Our job should be to look for the links that there are. And that is what, in a sense, all of human civilization has been about. The long struggle to bring tolerance and order and law out of the barbarity as humanity emerged millennia ago. And there are many people that have guided us. Over 2,000 years ago, the Rabbi Hillel spoke and argued for tolerance in the area we now think of as Palestine. A few hundred years later, Jesus, through all the brief 3 years of his ministry, I suppose we would call it, never once uttered a single sentence of intolerance about anybody. And then, and this is, I have to say, I'd like to think one day that Andrew Gilligan or Melanie Phillips would write an article analysing the last sermon of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Because that last sermon is the answer to Breivik. It is the answer to everyone who lives in fear of someone who is different. And it speaks in language we could use today. I quote just 2 sentences. No white man will be lifted above a black. No black man will be lifted above a white. I don't fear the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. I believe he is part of a tradition of civilized nation that stands foursquare against everything that Breivik and the lesser fanatics on the far right threaten us with. Thank you very much.
One of the